My name is Samantha Price, and I'm 28 years old. As I turned off the highway and onto the winding road that led to my childhood home in Ashridge, Oregon, I could feel my palms growing slick against the steering wheel. It had been 6 years since I last set foot in that house. 6 years of silence, of one sided voicemails, of promotions and medals received without even a text of acknowledgement. Now I was coming back. Not as the daughter they remembered, but as Director Samantha Price of the National Bureau for Digital Threat Response. Not that they knew that. As far as my family was concerned, I was still just Sam, the girl who ran off to join a government program no one respected, the one who turned down a full ride to law school and instead disappeared into the shadows of federal work. What they didn't know was that tomorrow, at my father's corporate summit, a summit hosted by Meridian Applied Technologies, where both my father and brother worked, I'd be sitting at the head of the table. Because I was the lead federal official overseeing their $1.1 billion cybersecurity contract, and every executive there would be answering to me. I pulled into the gravel driveway, the old swing still creaking lazily from the porch even in the absence of wind. Some things never changed. Before I continue, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your location in the comments and don't forget to like and subscribe. And trust me, if you've ever had your accomplishments dismissed by your own family, this story is going to show you just how satisfying vindication can taste. The moment I opened the front door, the scent of lemon cleaner and cinnamon bread hit me like time travel. Same faded beige wallpaper, same creaky floorboard under the entry rug, same framed family photos, none of which included a single picture of me in uniform. Samantha, you made it. Bienvenidos, you made it. My mother's voice called from the kitchen, not with joy, but with a restrained, polite neutrality. She didn't even come out to greet me. I set my suitcase down by the stairs, brushing off the ache of her indifference. Hey, Mom. You just missed your brother, she said, a pan clattering onto the stove. He's been working nonstop on the summit. They just promoted him again. Vice President of Cyber Integration, can you believe that? At 30. I'll be sure to congratulate him, I replied evenly, the words sliding out like they had so many times before. Rehearsed, measured, void of feeling. The kitchen was as cluttered and warm as I remembered, my mother darting between the stove and fridge like a well-trained machine. As she went on about Ethan's wife, their new Tesla, and the townhouse with a river view, I just nodded. She didn't ask how I'd been, didn't ask where I was living, didn't even ask what brought me back. Eventually, I excused myself and headed upstairs to the room I hadn't seen in years. The posters of indie bands I no longer listened to still clung to the walls. My high school laptop sat on the desk, frozen in time. The bookshelf was filled with dusty novels and robotics trophies. Everything was exactly as I'd left it, frozen in a version of me that no longer existed. What wasn't here were the pieces of the woman I had become. No framed photo from my commissioning ceremony. No awards for cyber operations. No printout of the article that once featured me as the youngest threat analyst to brief the cabinet. To them, those achievements simply didn't count. I opened my suitcase and pulled out the charcoal-colored suit, crisp and sharply tailored. Inside a separate sleeve lay my clearance badge, encoded with a silver stripe, labeled DCTR 1, Samantha Price, Director Level Omega Clearance. Tomorrow I would walk into that summit not as the overlooked daughter, but as the official whose signature could approve, or terminate, the contract my father had staked his legacy on. I reached under the bed and found, exactly where I remembered, a small tear in the mattress seam. The place I used to hide things from Ethan when we were kids. It was still there. So was the memory of sitting on this bed, 6 years ago, trying to explain to my family why I was leaving for a federal intelligence program instead of law school. My dad had scoffed. Cyber nonsense. You're smarter than that. Real jobs don't come with secrecy and badges. And Ethan had laughed, saying, "Come on, Sam. You'll be back in 6 months, probably working help desk at some agency." I smiled bitterly at the memory. They had no idea who they were about to meet tomorrow. Not Samantha, the sister. Not Sam, the failure. But Director Price, the woman in charge of everything they thought they controlled. The dining room hadn't changed either. Still framed with wallpaper that peeled slightly at the corners, still lit by that same 2 yellow chandelier that made everything look older than it was. The long oak table groaned under the weight of roast chicken, garlic mashed potatoes, glazed carrots, and my mother's famous cranberry walnut stuffing. It smelled like home, but none of it felt like it. My brother Ethan arrived precisely 5 minutes late, as always, with his wife Clara in tow. He breezed in like he owned the place, which, to be fair, he probably felt like he did. Dressed in a slim-fit navy jacket, Apple Watch glowing on his wrist, he gave Mom a quick peck on the cheek and nodded in my direction. "Well, look who showed up," he said casually, sliding off his coat. "Didn't think you'd make it back for anything, Sam. Government work keeping you that busy?" I smiled politely. "Something like that." Clara offered a brief hug, one of those, "I'm too successful for this small town" types of hugs. Light, cold, calculated. "You look, well," she said, eyes flicking to my shoes like they were some kind of relic. I took my seat at the far end of the table, directly opposite Ethan. My father, Gerald, sat at the head, sipping a neat scotch as though he were the emperor of this little domestic empire. We passed around dishes, murmuring thanks, chewing through the quiet. It didn't take long for the conversation to spiral exactly where I expected. "So," my mother began brightly, "Ethan's been selected to present at tomorrow's tech summit. Can you believe it? CEO Kyle herself asked for him." Ethan smiled modestly, clearly rehearsed. "She said she was impressed with my approach to integrated threat modeling. We're developing a modular firewall system that adapts to data flow anomalies in real time." My father beamed with pride. "And who do you think spearheaded that idea? Not one of the engineers. It was Ethan. That's leadership." Clara chimed in. "Most guys his age are still trying to get middle management to return their emails. Ethan's already got a corner office and 2 departments reporting to him." The praise poured like wine, filling the room, saturating the space until it dripped off the edges. Then, predictably, all eyes turned to me. "And what about you, Sam?" my mother asked, her tone too cheerful, too pointed. "Still working for that cyber office or something?" "That's right," I replied, keeping my voice even. "Still in digital threat response." My father raised an eyebrow. "Sounds bureaucratic. Paper pushing. You know, if you'd gone to law school like we suggested, you might have been partner at a firm by now." Ethan snorted softly. "Or at least something tangible. No offense, sis, but no one even knows what you do. You're like some kind of ghost employee." I resisted the urge to respond. Years of this had taught me when silence stings more than argument. "Actually," Clara added, reaching for the mashed potatoes, "I've always thought government jobs were, a safety net. Good for people who don't thrive in competitive environments." That one stung. My mother jumped back in, smiling as if she hadn't just allowed her son and daughter-in-law to belittle me. Anyway, Ethan's project could mean a huge deal for the company. If we secure this new federal cybersecurity contract, it could be our biggest win yet. "Oh?" I asked mildly, setting down my fork. "You're bidding on a federal contract?" "Not just bidding," Ethan said proudly. "We're top contenders. We've already passed phase 1, and tomorrow's presentation is the last step." I raised an eyebrow. "And what agency is this contract through?" My father chuckled. "Oh, come on, Sam. Don't pretend you'd know. This is high-level tech work. Department of Infrastructure? Digital Oversight Bureau? Something like that. It's all very hush-hush." Clara giggled. "Like the stuff you probably stamp papers for." I offered a small, unreadable smile. "Sounds fascinating." "It is," Ethan said. "And best part? We've been told the director herself might show up tomorrow. Imagine that. Having to impress the top digital security official in the country. Whoever she is." I took a long sip of water, hiding the smile that tugged at the corners of my mouth. They had no idea. The conversation drifted away from me after that. Back to Ethan's vacation plans in Cabo, Clara's new promotion at her firm, my father's retirement goals, maybe finally making VP before stepping down. No one asked where I lived now. No one asked what I'd been doing for the past 6 years. No one even asked if I was happy. And for the first time, I realized it didn't matter. They weren't going to understand until they were forced to see. And that moment was exactly 12 hours away. That night, I lay on the bed in my childhood room, staring at the familiar cracks on the ceiling, the ones I used to count when sleep wouldn't come. Nothing had changed, except me. The trophies on the shelf still gleamed with teenage effort. The best robotics project ribbon from junior year. The certificate for coding camp, yellowed at the edges. All relics from a time before I made the wrong choice. The night I told my family I'd accepted an offer to join the Digital Threat Cadet program instead of attending law school, my father had stared at me like I'd just announced I was moving to Mars. Cyber intelligence? He repeated flatly. That's a temporary gig. It's not a real career. My mother had quietly asked, but don't you want a future? I did, just not the one they pictured. They wanted a daughter who wore suits to networking events, who married someone in finance and lived 2 blocks from their country club. Instead, I deployed with encrypted drives, wore tactical boots, and learned to decrypt ransomware before most of the world even knew what ransomware was. I rose through the ranks not because anyone handed me opportunity, but because I saw patterns no one else could. I built prediction models when others still used spreadsheets. By the time I was 24, I was briefing members of parliament behind closed doors. At 26, I identified a foreign breach before it could shut down 3 major hospitals in Chicago. And at 27, I was tapped to lead Operation Iron Dome, a silent digital shield that had already prevented 2 massive infrastructure attacks this year alone. That operation earned me my current title, Director Cyber Intelligence Division under the National Bureau for Digital Threat Response, the agency at the top of the federal cybersecurity command chain. Only a handful of people in the country even knew what I did. Even fewer had the clearance to see my name on the contracts. And none of them were my family. My mentor, Dr. Helena Grant, had seen it in me long before I did. You don't walk into rooms, she told me once. You scan them. You think 5 steps ahead before anyone else finishes step 1? That instinct doesn't belong in courtrooms. It belongs in crisis rooms. She was the one who nominated me for director. She pinned the badge on me herself. Not one person in my family knew that ceremony even happened. I stood up, walked to the closet, and pulled out my formal protocol suit. Sleek, modern, dark gray with a navy trim along the collar. A small lapel pin read DCTR1. The badge card clipped behind it was encrypted, biometric locked. It had more access authority than most intelligence field officers ever dreamed of. I stared at it for a moment. Then I placed it gently on the desk. Tomorrow, I wouldn't need to say a word. My title would speak for itself. As I turned out the light, my phone buzzed. Incoming message. Helena Grant. Briefing confirmed. Summit begins 900. Prime Minister will dial in at 9:45. All eyes on you, Director. You ready? I typed back. More than ready. I lay down again, fingers tracing the edge of the old blanket on my bed, the same one I'd hidden under the night I cried silently after my dad said, "Government jobs are where dreams go to die." I smiled now. Not bitter, not angry, just calm. They would find out soon enough that my dream didn't die. It built a firewall around an entire nation. The morning of the summit arrived with a sky of sharp blue and air crisp enough to bite. I stood in front of the mirror, adjusting the final button of my protocol suit, checking the badge clipped to my lapel. No mascara, no lip gloss, no frills, just the weight of authority and clarity. Director Samantha Price. The ride to Meridian Applied Technologies took 10 minutes. I pulled into the front lot, bypassing visitor parking, and pulled into the reserved federal liaison space directly beside the executive entrance. Security spotted the tag on my windshield and radioed in immediately. Director on site. Eyes up. The guard at the main checkpoint stood at attention as I approached. Director Price, he said with a nod of recognition. Welcome to Meridian. You're expected in conference room A. Thank you, I replied, flashing my ID as protocol required. I'll head up now. The glass building shimmered in the sunlight, its architecture clean and modern. Sterile, almost. As I rode the elevator up to the executive floor, my heartbeat stayed steady. I'd been in war rooms and blackout bunkers. I'd negotiated with angry bureaucrats and foreign diplomats. But this? Walking into a room with my father and brother? Somehow, that was the battle I had prepared my whole life for. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime. I stepped out, and there he was. Ethan, standing in the hallway outside the main conference room, swiping through slides on his tablet, muttering stats under his breath. He glanced up lazily and froze. Sam? His eyes moved from my face to my suit, to the badge, then to the lapel pin. Why are you... What the hell are you doing here? I offered a calm nod. Good morning, Ethan. I'm here for the summit. He blinked, uncomprehending. Wearing that? That's not a visitor badge. What even is that? It means, I said, walking past him, I'm not here as a guest. I barely made it 2 more steps before a familiar voice echoed down the corridor. Sam? My father turned the corner, mid-conversation with 2 colleagues from the executive board. He stopped dead when he saw me, his brows knit. What is this? Why are you dressed like that? His tone wasn't angry. Not yet. More confused. Almost panicked. I nodded politely. Good morning, Mr. Price. I believe I'm expected in conference room A. The woman standing beside him, Nina Kale, CEO of Meridian, looked between us. Her eyes lit up when they landed on me. Director Price? She said, stepping forward, hand extended. You came in person. What an honor. I shook her hand firmly. It felt appropriate, given the scale of the contract. My father's face turned a shade I'd never seen before, somewhere between blood-drained pale and burnt red. Director? He echoed weakly. Nina turned to him. Yes, Gerald. This is the Director of Cyber Intelligence from the NBDTR, our primary liaison for the contract. She holds final clearance authority. I thought she was attending via secure call, but this is even better. She turned back to me. We're grateful you made time, ma'am. I caught the way Ethan's mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. Then I said it. I look forward to evaluating your team's presentation today. I've reviewed the documents. I'll have questions. Nina smiled. Excellent. Shall we go in? I nodded, then glanced at my father. See you inside. As I walked past, I heard the soft, stunned whisper from one of the executives beside him. Wait, Gerald, that's your daughter? Conference room A buzzed with the low hum of pre-meeting chatter. Executives adjusted their ties, assistants set out water pitchers, and engineers double-checked their presentation slides. But the moment I entered, the room fell silent. All eyes turned to me. Some recognized my face from classified briefings or internal memos. Others didn't, but they knew enough to notice the badge, the suit, the posture. I didn't need to say a word. Authority introduced itself. A staffer nearly knocked over a tray of coffee. Director Price, she stammered, we didn't know you were attending in person. Do you require a separate briefing room? No, I replied, taking my seat at the head of the table. This will do. The next few minutes passed in waves of restrained chaos. Senior team leads shuffled papers, whispered amongst themselves, and shot nervous glances toward me. My father entered last with Ethan, both taking seats further down the table, as far from me as the room allowed. The same man who'd laughed at my career 12 hours ago now sat rigid in his chair, eyeing me like a stranger. Then the doors opened again, and CEO Nina Kale entered, followed by her chief of operations and legal counsel. She moved with confidence, but this time, her gaze sought me out first. Good morning, everyone, she began. We're honored today by the presence of the Director of Cyber Intelligence at the National Bureau for Digital Threat Response, Director Samantha Price. She will be overseeing the implementation of the federal security contract we've been pursuing these past 6 months. Heads turned, whispers spread. I kept my expression neutral. Thank you, Ms. Kale. She continued, as most of you know, this project, Project Sentinel, involves the deployment of next-gen security frameworks to protect national infrastructure across energy, healthcare, and transportation sectors. Director Price holds final authority over technical specifications, compliance validation, and implementation sign-off. Ethan looked like he'd swallowed a nail. My father stared blankly at the conference table in front of him. The first few presentations began. Data, projections, system flow, buzzwords. I listened, took notes, and waited. Then Ethan stood to present. He cleared his throat twice, adjusted his blazer, and began. For the user integration segment, we've developed a dynamic alert interface using biometric escalation protocols. I raised a hand. Mr. Price, before you continue, a clarification. He froze. Yes, Director? Your proposed escalation protocol, I said calmly, relies on passive retinal scanning. What's your mitigation strategy for false positives in low-light scenarios, or when adaptive lenses are involved? He blinked. We factored for most variables, but the specifics... So you don't have a resolution matrix built into the interface? I mean, we were planning to... I see, I said, letting silence fill the room. Then that needs to be resolved before this phase can proceed. Submit your revisions by end of week. Include scenario-based testing results. The entire room shifted in energy, from awkward curiosity to full awareness. I was not just some silent liaison. I was running the show. Ethan sat down, face flushed, hands tight in his lap. My father watched with the expression of a man watching his own foundation crack. More presentations followed, most solid, some shaky. I offered insight, corrected errors, and when needed, drew clear lines. There was no malice in my voice, just precision, just leadership. And that was the part that stunned them all, because I wasn't emotional, I wasn't vengeful, I was undeniably competent. By the end of the meeting, Nina turned to me and said, Director Price, would you like to share any final directives? I stood slowly. This contract, I began, is not just a checkmark on someone's performance review. It's about protecting real systems, real lives. I've reviewed every line of your proposals. Some are promising, others need work. I looked at Ethan. Effective immediately, my office will begin performance evaluations on each sub-team lead. Continued involvement in the project will depend on meeting compliance expectations. Several executives glanced toward Ethan. The message was clear. And lastly, I added, I will remain on site through the remainder of the week to conduct in-person assessments. With that, I sat down. Meeting adjourned. As people filed out, my father approached hesitantly, still processing. But before he could speak, Nina turned and said to him with wide eyes, Gerald, why didn't you ever tell us your daughter was that Director Price? He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. I looked at him. This man who once told me the military, the government, any of it was a backup plan. And I said gently, because he didn't know. And I walked out. It was 11:03 a.m. when I knocked on the door of my father's office. Through the frosted glass, I saw 3 silhouettes, my father, my mother, and Ethan. Someone must have called her in after the meeting. I half expected Clara to be there too, clutching her handbag and giving her usual side glances. But thankfully, it was just them. Enter, my father said, his voice thinner than usual. I stepped in, still in uniform, still calm. The same presence that had filled the boardroom walked into that private space now. But what filled the air here wasn't formality. It was old dust, long-buried silence, unspoken things. My mother stood first. Samantha, I held up a hand. Let's keep this professional. I only have 15 minutes before my next briefing. That shut down the niceties. I don't even know where to start, my father finally said. He looked shell-shocked. You've been a director this whole time? For almost a year, I confirmed. I was promoted after Operation Iron Dome. You would have known, if you'd picked up the phone. But we didn't even know you were in cybersecurity that deep, my mother said, her voice wavering. All you ever told us was that you worked in some federal office. I told you what you needed to know, I said. But you never asked anything real. Ethan folded his arms. You think showing up today was fair? Blindsiding us in front of the entire board? I wasn't hiding, I replied. I was doing my job. You're the ones who never thought to ask what it actually was. You let us believe you were nothing, he shot back. No, I said firmly. You chose to believe that. They fell silent. I continued, voice low but even. I invited you to every promotion ceremony. You never came. I sent you the article when I briefed Parliament on cyber defense. You never responded. I even tried to call after my second deployment. You were too busy planning Ethan's wedding. My mother sat slowly, the weight of my words pressing her into the chair. You always had potential, she murmured. We just didn't understand why you would throw it away on this kind of work. My throat tightened. You didn't understand it, so you dismissed it. My father looked up, eyes glassy now. You're telling us you've been protecting national systems? Hospitals? Power grids? Yes, I replied. And people. Lots of people. From things they'll never even know almost happened. Ethan leaned against the wall, arms still crossed. So now what? You want us to fall at your feet and apologize? Admit you were right all along? I looked at him. Really looked. My brother, who'd always walked the path they paved for him, who never had to prove his worth because it was handed to him at birth. No, I said, this isn't about being right. It's about finally being seen. My father finally spoke. And what if we don't know how to do that? Then learn, I said simply, the same way I learned to stop needing your validation. That landed like a hammer. I'm not the girl who begged for your approval anymore, I added. That girl died quietly, somewhere between my first debriefing and my first crisis protocol. My mother wiped under her eyes. Samantha, we were wrong. Yes, I said. You were. The silence that followed was heavier than any battlefield I'd stood on. And then, slowly, my father stood up. He extended his hand, not for a hug, not for comfort, but as one professional might greet another. Director Price, he said, his voice thick, I owe you a deep apology. I failed to see you. I failed to respect the life you built. I hesitated. Then I shook his hand. His grip trembled slightly. Whether from emotion or shame, I couldn't tell. My mother stood too. I don't know how to fix what we broke, but I want to try. I nodded. Trying is a good start. Ethan looked away for a long moment, then quietly. So, you outrank me by a lot, huh? A smile crept to the edge of my mouth. Technically, yes, but this isn't a competition. He huffed a laugh, rubbing the back of his neck. Sure felt like one all our lives. I softened. We both played the roles we were handed. But you rewrote yours, he said. And I think I need to take a hard look at mine. It was the first time in years I saw my brother, not my rival. I checked my watch. I have to brief my security team in 5 minutes. I turned toward the door, then paused. One more thing. They looked up. Tonight, I've been invited to a private dinner with the Prime Minister and select partners from the summit. There's one open seat at my table. If you'd like to come, as family, not guest, you're welcome. I didn't wait for their answer. As I walked out of the office, I heard my father whisper to Ethan, She's not just our daughter. She's a force. And for the first time in my life, that sounded like the truth. That evening, as golden light spilled across the skyline of Ashridge, I sat alone at the hotel rooftop lounge, sipping water and watching the clouds drift beyond the glass barriers. A message blinked on my phone. From Mom. We'd like to join you tonight. We'll meet you outside the venue at 7. I stared at it for a moment. No emojis, no smiley faces, just sincerity. That was a start. By 6:55 p.m., I stood in the front lobby of the Westgate Ballroom, dressed again in my formal director's attire. Not to prove anything, but because this was who I was now. No longer shrinking to fit the version of me they could accept. At 6:59, a silver sedan pulled up. My mother stepped out first, wearing a navy dress I'd never seen before. Clean lines, elegant, understated, like she'd chosen it for this moment. She looked nervous. My father followed, adjusting the cufflinks on his jacket. His tie was crooked. I almost reached out to fix it. Almost. Then Ethan emerged, dressed sharper than usual. No arrogance in his posture this time, only quiet respect. Hi, my mother said softly. Hi, I replied. We weren't sure if we should come. You came, I said simply. That's what matters. Inside the ballroom, the lighting was warm, the conversations buzzing. The Prime Minister had not arrived yet, but the air was electric with anticipation. I led them to our assigned table, Table 1, dead center, reserved for high-level delegates. My mother's eyes widened as she saw the place cards. Director Price. Host. She touched it gently like she wasn't sure it was real. You're hosting this? I nodded. Technically, I'm co-host, but yes, tonight's event is part of the federal rollout. I oversee the national compliance strategy. Ethan looked around, astonished. Half these people are senators and CEOs. Some are foreign diplomats, I added. Keep your small talk neutral. To my surprise, my father laughed, an actual genuine chuckle. Same rules as the office, huh? Exactly, I said, allowing myself a smile. The first course was served. The conversation was cautious but different. It wasn't polite small talk. It was curious, respectful. My mother asked about my team. My father asked what kind of people I hired. Ethan asked how I handle international protocol. I answered without hiding anymore. No more downplaying, no more dodging. Halfway through the meal, Dr. Helena Grant, my mentor and the former director, approached our table. Director Price, she greeted with a warm smile. May I join you? Of course. I stood and pulled out a chair. Everyone, isn't it that eh? So, Yinsin, this is Dr. Grant. She trained me. My father stood and extended his hand with surprising dignity. You must be the one who saw in Samantha what we didn't. Dr. Grant shook his hand. The potential was always there. I just gave it room to grow. My mother's lip quivered. We didn't know. You never asked, I replied softly. Not with anger this time, but as a simple truth, Doctor. Grant shared a few sanitized anecdotes about our early work. Her stories painted a picture they'd never heard before, a version of me they were just beginning to meet. She built the breach response protocol used nationwide now, Helena said, pride in her voice. Saved billion and lives. My father exhaled slowly. I had no idea. The kind of impact. You don't always see the battlefield, I said. Sometimes the war is just quiet code and invisible hands. Ethan looked at me differently now, like he'd finally seen something he hadn't been able to comprehend. So when you said at dinner that you'd been busy, you meant saving the country? I chuckled. Roughly. He grinned. And here I was bragging about a product pitch. They both matter, I said, just in different ways. That landed. We weren't enemies, we were just people, raised in different lanes. Later, as dessert was served and laughter bubbled through the room, the Prime Minister arrived. Cameras flashed, hands were shaken. When he made his way to me, he said loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear, Director Price, it's an honor. You've made this initiative stronger than we could have imagined. The look on my father's face, of pride, awe, and just a tinge of disbelief, would stay with me for a long time. He leaned over and whispered, You've become someone the whole world listens to, and we nearly missed it. You didn't miss it, I whispered back. You're here now. The sky over Washington, D.C. was soft with snow flurries when I set the table in my apartment, a sleek modern space overlooking the Potomac. It wasn't extravagant, but every detail reflected me. Minimal, structured, intentional. 6 months had passed since that dinner at Westgate Ballroom. 6 months since my family saw me, truly saw me, for the first time. Tonight, they were coming to my home for the first time. Not to impress them, not to prove anything, just to be together. The doorbell rang at exactly 6. I opened the door to see my father, holding a large framed plaque wrapped in navy paper. I had this made, he said. It's the article from the national paper. The one with your photo standing beside the Prime Minister and Dr. Grant. I unwrapped it slowly. My name and title were printed in bold above the headline, Director Samantha Price leads the digital shield of the nation. Thank you, Dad, I said quietly. That means more than you know. I keep one in my office, too, he added, awkwardly clearing his throat, right above the leadership chart. My mother followed behind, holding a pie dish. Homemade, she said, smiling nervously. Your favorite, apple with cinnamon sugar. I didn't burn the crust this time. I smiled. Smells like high school, but in a good way. They stepped inside, removing coats, soaking in the clean lines, framed citations, a few awards, all tastefully tucked between books and artwork. There was no ego here, just evidence of a life built intentionally. Ethan and Clara arrived a few minutes later with wine. Not the flashy kind, but a rich, well-thought-out blend I actually liked. Ethan looked around the apartment, nodding slowly. This is really nice. Functional. Sharp. It's home, I said. Finally. Over dinner, conversation flowed more easily than I expected. My mother asked about a recent initiative I'd briefed Parliament on. My father recounted how 2 interns at Meridian now quote my security white papers. Even Clara, always the most distant, asked to read one of my op-eds that got republished internationally. And Ethan? He leaned back in his chair and said, So, last month I implemented the threat protocol you suggested. The board called it brilliant. I might have waited a day before giving you credit. I laughed. Progress, he grinned. I've learned more from your emails than from 3 years of managers. After dessert, as we sipped coffee and the city lights flickered beyond the glass, my father raised his cup. To Samantha Price, he said, standing tall. Director, daughter, defender. You reminded us that success isn't always loud, but when it finally speaks, it echoes. I stood too, raising my own cup but quietly. To being seen, not for what people expected us to be, but for who we really are. They all raised their glasses, and for once the air wasn't full of expectation or performance. It was just still, safe, home. Later that night, after they left, I sat by the window and let myself feel the weight of what had changed. No, they hadn't been perfect. No, the wounds didn't heal overnight, but they were trying. And for the first time in my life, I didn't need to prove anything anymore. I was Samantha Price, director, strategist, daughter, not because of them, not in spite of them, but because I had chosen to be. And that was enough.